All right, all right, all right. We are here. I've been grooving to the music a little bit here, and we are here, and we are live. We are live, and we are getting all of this together here for a moment here. All right, I think we are up and are ready to go on this live stream today. Good evening, and welcome to our town hall titled Memphis. Let's talk about public safety. This town hall is part of the Reimagining Public Safety initiative between the Black Public Defender Association and Gifts of Life Ministries, Public Advocacy and Social Justice Institute. This initiative aims to introduce a model for asking directly impacted Black communities, what does safety mean to you? In this project, we are partnered with groups and institutions and organizations to plan, execute, and document a public safety needs assessment in Memphis and in Shelby County. I am your host, the Reverend Andre Johnson, Senior Pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries and Executive Director of the G-Life Public Advocacy and Social Justice Institute. With us also tonight, co-hosting this panel is the Memphis and Shelby County Justice and Safety Alliance. They are a coalition in Memphis and Shelby County that works to hold public systems accountable for providing and promoting justice and limiting disparities and harm, particularly now in the youth and adult criminal legal systems, while also supporting the development of the continuum of opportunities for Black and Brown communities that supports true accountability, healing, growth, and transformative justice. You'll hear more from the Justice and Safety Alliance a little bit later in the evening. However, before we go any further, I would like to bring on Elena Bloodworth with the Black Public Defender Association to share a little more about our Reimagining Public Safety Initiative and some of the wonderful work BPDA does. Elena, thank you for being here with us on tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having us. We are excited about this. I just wanted to start off to tell everyone a little bit about BPDA. I won't be long because I believe this is you all's space, right? I want to be able to give you all that time. The Black Public Defender Association was founded on the recognition that creating and maintaining a national network of Black public defenders who identify and come with the communities most disproportionately impacted by the carceral systems is necessary to fight and end mass incarceration. We support a national network of skilled Black defenders. And when we say Black defenders, we mean social workers, investigators, attorneys, civil defense, immigration, client advocates, whoever is fighting on behalf of the community, who work to dismantle carceral systems and return power and resources back to the communities of color. Our work is guided by our core values of humanity, excellence, holistic defense, community, and of extreme importance, Black liberation. But before I go even further, I have to give a special shout out to my sis, my mentor, April Frazier Camara. This project would not exist if not for April Frazier Camara, our immediate past chair and current president and CEO of NLADA. April is a native to Shelby County and connected with Dr. Johnson during his efforts to fight for justice for Purvis Payne. And that connection, they gave birth to the idea to reimagine justice and safety from the Black community perspective. BPDA is so excited to be partnering with Dr. Johnson and Gifts of Life Ministries to launch this exciting new project to ask Black Memphis residents, what does safety mean to you? Too often, policy proposals on safety are defined for Black communities and not with Black communities, even though our communities are most impacted by the policing, surveillance, and incarceration. As Black defenders, we witness the harm of carceral systems professionally through our clients and personally through our communities. We are excited to partner with Gift of Life Ministries to amplify the voice of the Black community members in Memphis as you define safety for yourselves. Again, thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to say a few words. I'm going to be watching from the YouTube live stream. I can't wait for this conversation. Thank you so much.
And thank you for being here and being a part of this wonderful gathering tonight. And thank you for sharing. Tonight, we want to talk about public safety, but not in the way that you are used to hearing about it. Typically, when we hear about public safety, it involves increasing police budgets and bodies, longer prison sentences, and or building more prisons. Even now, our state legislators right here in the state of Tennessee are debating a truth in sentencing bill that will require people to serve their entire sentences without any opportunity for parole. Here in Shelby County, Tennessee, our county commissioners just approved $13 million more in funding for a juvenile detention center that, as reports indicate, has already cost just about as much. So when the talk rather is about public safety, it seems as if we always think and go punitively. However, tonight we want to try another way, because if community safety is the issue that many say it is, when we do the same thing over and over and expect different results, we have to start questioning what we have been doing. So tonight, we have a panel that will chart new ways for us to think about public safety and offer some solutions. First, attorney Kimkea Harris. She has served as an attorney with the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police Labor Council since June of 2011. Prior to joining the Labor Council, she was coordinator for the labor relations for the Memphis City Schools, assistant city attorney for the city of Memphis, and assistant district attorney for Shelby County, right here in Tennessee. Kimkea has a BA in political science from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where she graduated summa cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa, and a law degree from Washington and Lee University of Law in Lexington, Virginia. Kimkea is licensed both in Tennessee and Illinois. Kimkea is an active member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She joined the sorority back in '92 at the Phi Pi chapter located at Fisk University. She is active in social justice issues and serves as co-chair of the Justice Task Force, which is part of the Ben F. Jones chapter of the National Bar Association. In this role, Kimkea leads her advocacy efforts on behalf of Tennessee death row inmate Purvis Payne, who was recently removed from Tennessee death row after 33 and a half long years. She is also helping to lead a Shelby County, Tennessee community education component on the power and roles of a prosecutor. Thank you for being with us here tonight, attorney Kimkea Harris. Dr. Duane Loynes Sr. is an assistant professor of urban studies and Africana studies at Rhodes College, right here in Memphis, Tennessee. He holds an interdisciplinary Ph.D. in religious studies from Marquette University. His research and teaching are situated at the sweet spot where race, philosophy, religion, culture, and justice intersect. Dr. Loynes is currently researching the fractured relationship between Black communities and law enforcement, applying the theoretical frameworks of Afro-pessimism, critical race theory, and unconscious bias to understand the complex dynamics of anti-Black state violence in the United States. He also trains healthcare professionals and students on developing practices to minimize the role that implicit bias plays in framing the patient-provider relationship. In addition to his appointment in urban studies and Africana study programs, Dr. Loynes also teaches ethics and religion courses for the Life program at Rhodes and is a founding faculty member of the college's post-baccalaureate certificate in health equity. Dr. Loynes, thank you for being with us here tonight. The Reverend Vahisha Hasan. She is a faith root organizer moving at the intersections of faith, social justice, and mental health. She is the executive director of Movement and Faith, a project of Transform Network. She is a powerful public speaker, transformative facilitator, social justice trainer, minister, and writer with a deeply prophetic voice and imagination for how faith communities can be active and an active part of healing and collective liberation. She is currently the director of the SEAL initiatives, Social Justice, Equity, Advocacy, and Leadership at American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee. However, she is now the incoming program director of historic Clayborn Temple. Hallelujah. Vahisha holds a dual Masters of Divinity and Masters of Mental Health Counseling with an education specialist certification from Gardner-Webb University and a bachelor's degree in communication with a concentration in interpersonal organization from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Reverend Hasan, thank you for being here with us on tonight. Attorney Demetria Frank. She is an associate dean of diversity and inclusion at the and associate professor of law at the Cecil C. Humphreys School of Law at the University of Memphis. Prior to becoming Memphis Law's inaugural associate dean for diversity and inclusion in 2021, she served as the program director for 3 years. Under Dean Frank's leadership, Memphis Law has established an extended pipeline beginning in high school and lasting throughout law school graduation. Committed to bridging the gap between underrepresented communities and the legal system, Dean Frank's scholarly research focusing on prisoner rights, systemic bias, and diversity in legal education has been published in the Harvard Journal for Racial and Ethnic Justice, Brooklyn Law Review, and the Memphis Law Review, among other publications. As a result of her commitment to justice and ongoing dedication to opportunity youth, in 2018, she was appointed by Mayor Lee Harris to serve as the Shelby County Juvenile Justice, serve on the Shelby County Countywide Juvenile Justice Consortium, got it, for which she served as chair for 2 years, and in 2020 was appointed to the United States Commission on Civil Rights Advisory Committee to serve a 4-year term as a member of Tennessee's Advisory Committee. Dean Frank regularly consults and speaks on issues relating to diversity, inclusion, cultural competence, implicit bias, and organizational culture. We are so honored and privileged to have Dean Frank with us here tonight as well. And finally, Cardell Orrin, who currently serves as the executive director for Stand for Children Tennessee, working to advance education, equity, and racial justice. Prior to this, Cardell was the founder and principal of Links Consulting, and over 10 years, Cardell was involved in projects that impacted the community across a wide breadth of areas, including strategic planning, community development, and public strategies. Before founding Links Consulting, Cardell moved back to Memphis to serve as the Chief Informational Officer at Lemoyne College. Cardell has a passion for serving the community and has led efforts as a founding board member of Hallelujah Theater, Memphis Urban League Young Professionals, and the Benjamin Hooks Institute for Social Change Advisory Board. With an understanding of how politics influences the community, Cardell co-founded New Path, a local political action committee focused on engaging young people in the political process and electing solution-oriented candidates to office. He continues to serve as board chair for Freedom Preparatory Academy, along with the service on boards of Hallelujah, Overland Park Conservatory, and Memphis for All, and he has been honored by the April 4th Foundation with their Trailblazer Award. Cardell graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and Computer Science and Engineering with additional studies in African American Studies and Entrepreneurial Management. Cardell, thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank all of you for joining us here tonight. And I will turn it over to my good friend and brother Cardell Orrin so he can tell us a little bit more about JSA and all the good work that they're doing. Cardell, again, thank you.
Thank you. I was trying to get to my mute button. We were challenged early by our cohort accomplice Vahisha to recognize the different ways that people learn and to have a visual aspect. So I put something together because I respect her voice and I think that she's right. So as I talk through these things, I threw together a quick PowerPoint for us to just kind of see as I talk about how we got to the place of the report that we want to talk about and the Justice and Safety Alliance. And this really started as we heard Reverend Johnson talk about and our friend from Public Defenders Organization about with George Floyd. I mean, it started before this, of course, because we've known that there's been a history of police violence and challenges across decades, especially for the Black community, in terms of what public safety is and how we define that for ourselves and across the community, and how it tends to have a different definition of what safety means depending on who's talking about it. And safety for one person of additional and more policing can mean a non-safe environment for some communities when we see Black and brown communities over-policed. But this, of course, as everyone knows, came to a head around George Floyd and many of the more recent police violence episodes that we have now been able to record and see on video, and to gain the issues and the challenges that they all deserve throughout history, back to lynchings. And through this, with the uprisings and outrage across the country, we had our own here. And we know that we had protests here. We saw one of our own other leaders of a Tone nonprofit, Victoria Jones, attacked by police here in our own cities. And as we saw this, several of us Black leaders in the nonprofit arena came together and said, we need to say something about this in our community, and we need to demand a change and a difference. First, we need to make sure that we are on the same page about the need to have accountability and prevention of police violence in our own community. So we came together and formed this effort called Memphis Nonprofits Demand Action, about 5 of us, and wrote a letter about police violence and the challenges of that, but then also about systemic issues that we see in our community, because we know that there's a connection between not just what we see with police violence and crime, but also our safety and wellness in our community. And we got over 150 other nonprofit leaders to sign on to this letter, white and Black and brown, across the whole community. What we also did, because this letter included demands, because we wanted it not just to be a letter expressing outrage, as so many put out at the time and since, but we wanted there to be an action. I think that there was a question in the Q&A already about how you take action. So we put in the letter demands. And not only did we put letters in the demands in the letter, but we wanted to circle back around and say, well, how are elected officials doing if we graded them on these demands? And you can see now on your screen, these were the first grades that we gave out. Not a whole lot of good grades. This is not what you would want to see your child come home with from school. And this upset some of the elected officials, so much so that some of them struck out and made their own calls and challenges to people who had signed on to the letter, and broke some relationships and challenged others because we were laying out this accountability platform. And as part of that, we wanted to have clear efforts that were not just about this moment in time, but about going forward. And so we had in the letter issues around how do we invest in our community? So how not only are we increasing police in our community, which if we look across the history over the last 20 years, we would see that in the city of Memphis, funding for K-12 education has gone from a height of 100 million down to zero. And at the same time, the police budget has doubled. And as we see that, there is not money for investment in real broadly defined public safety if we do not think about it as what are we investing in transit? What are we investing in education? What are we investing in affordable housing? All of these things we know matter for public safety and wellness. And so these were parts of the things, and so of the demand letter. And so a part of that was around community participation and budgeting and the investments that we need to make. So we have the Moral Budget Coalition that we formed. And the Moral Budget Coalition last year pushed for additional investments in our community for people and communities and workers. And then this year we've joined forces and have with the Shelby County Commission Black Caucus has helped to push budget participation from the community in the budget process. We've been working with Mayor Lee Harris's office to have a budget participation from the community. There will be a community survey that's coming out and additional public sessions around educating around the budget and what kind of investments we as the community want to see. But the other piece that we knew that we needed was just what we've already heard talked about, which is that as a coalition and as a community, we did not see a voice out there that came together as a single voice to give our perspective on what public safety should look like. And so we came together with several organizations, many who have already been working in justice issues like Official Black Lives Matter, Memphis chapter, and Just City, and MICA, and Memphis for All, and several other organizations. I shouldn't start naming them. They're all listed on our website at justiceandsafety.org. But we didn't see our perspective, and we didn't see this broad idea of what public safety should be and the impacts that we know it can have in our community, and that over decades, we've seen the same status quo, tough on crime efforts like Andre talked about. Now it's truth in sentencing. Several years ago, it was mandatory sentencing. All of these efforts follow along the same path to mass incarceration. And we have to start calling out the local actors who are involved in this practice that is harming our community that we can see here and across the country. So we formed the Justice and Safety Alliance, and this is our first inaugural effort to be out publicly official. You can see as part of our platform, we wanted to reimagine what it means to have public safety across our community. So you'll see here, establish accountability, transparency, and oversight. Prioritize health and wellness interventions. So changing the idea of how we engage with communities and people and not just seeing them as criminals to be locked up for longer periods of time and taking anecdotal evidence as Mayor Strickland and DA Wyrick have done recently just to showcase why we need to lock up people for longer periods of time, but thinking about it in a broader range of how do we engage people and how do we bring them back into our community with building restorative community solutions, supporting youth justice, that is real youth justice to support our young people in our community, ending criminalization of poverty. So a focus on ending money bail and the challenges that come solely because people cannot provide to get out of jail or bail or pay fees and fines. And so we've been working around eliminating youth fines and fees at the state level and investing in people and communities. And that we understand is core to reimagining what we think of as the justice, safety, and wellness of our community. And the real belief that what we are doing and the facts and the statistics that show us that what we have been doing is not working. And so we have to look at it in a different way. And just as Andre said, we can identify multiple sources to get $30 million to build a new or renovate a new youth detention center to hold our young people. We should also be able to find resources to build restorative places and centers that support our young people and our communities and have workforce development that engages and helps people to build jobs and careers and helps them to find ways to support their families so that they don't feel the call to engage in crime or to not feel a sense that there is a thriving life ahead of them and to disregard the rights of other people in their community. And we feel that investing in people and believing that they have value, which so many of our policies don't recognize the value of Black people in our community and our Black communities that just do not show these things that we need to see. So that is what we formed Justice Safety Alliance. And what we wanted to do was have a similar effort as some of the things we see in the opposition of having research and reports. And this is the vision is to engage the full community over time in really engaging on what are the plans and the actions that we can take to build a better and safer community. And so we reached out to some brilliant friends of ours to think about with all of this thought and push locally around police residency and the need for more police. And there's a magic number of police that if we get this number of police, all of a sudden crime will go away and things will be beautiful, rainbows will come out if we can just get to this large number of police. So we wanted to have a different perspective. So we called our friends Duane, Loynes, and Demetria to reimagine policing. And of course, the city launched an effort called Reimagine Policing. And we've seen the report, but we're still waiting to see where those recommendations come into play at their reimagining of policing. So we decided to say, hey, let's have policing reimagined so that we can really think about, as you see here, what's the history of policing and how is that impacting our communities over time? And then what are some of the real solutions that can get to more immediate impact, like crisis intervention, gun violence prevention, and youth justice? So I'm going to bring on Dr. Loynes to give more insight into this report and the findings there.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Cardell, for that introduction and for your leadership and wisdom on this project. Thank you to Dr. Andre Johnson and the Justice and Safety Alliance for planning and coordinating this event. And a special thanks to Dean Demetria Frank at the University of Memphis and Mackenzie Graham at Stand to Reason for their work on this project. And of course, thanks to all of the panelists and to all of you for joining us here this evening. This is not a formal presentation on my part, but if it were, I would entitle it A Tale of Two Cities, or Why I'm Not Going to Allow People to Gaslight Me on These Issues. Let me explain. Prior to living in Memphis, I lived in two cities, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Holland, Michigan. Milwaukee in many ways is similar to Memphis, has the same population, about 600,000 or so citizens. Milwaukee also has a large Black population, somewhere around 40%. And like Memphis, Milwaukee is struggling with the legacy of a brutal history of white supremacy and community disinvestment. And one thing about Milwaukee is that police officers are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. They are almost a natural part of the fabric of that city. Now, my son attended kindergarten through fourth grade and is in the 53206 zip code in the center of the city. Now, that zip code, 53206, may not mean anything to you, but it is widely regarded as the most incarcerated zip code in this nation, and some would argue in the world. In the 53206 zip code, more Black men are incarcerated than in any other place in America. At times, up to 62% of Black men in 53206 are incarcerated. That's 5 out of every 8 Black men. That means an absence of fathers, an absence of sons, an absence of brothers. It means an absence of partners, leaving many Black women as single parents who are forced to work long hours or work 2 jobs and who have to shoulder the burdens of parenting alone. It means a loss of role models and a loss of heroes. I saw this reality before I understood it. I mentioned that my son attended school in this zip code, and I recall so many times going to school programs and performances and being one of the few fathers present. But then in 2015, I received a postdoctoral dissertation fellowship, and my family and I moved almost directly across Lake Michigan to the city of Holland, Michigan. There, the Black population was quite small, only 3%, and the city was remarkably well-developed. There was good access to healthcare, a well-supported and well-resourced public education system, They had a thriving economy. They had these venerable institutions that had been carefully maintained. There were an abundance of parks and beautiful homes on the lakefront, and a culture that took pride in the largely Dutch Christian heritage that dominated the city and the region. And I noticed early on, and it was confirmed over time, you never saw police officers. In fact, the absence of police officers was so profound that I remember the first time that I saw a police car in Holland, Michigan. And this is why I know we're not crazy, because a lot of white and well-resourced communities have already figured this out. Communities that are thriving have little need for a militarized, omnipresent police force. Or put differently, true public safety comes from investing in people and families and communities, not from investing in law enforcement. We are here tonight because we are radical visionaries who refuse to be gaslit. We refuse those who tell us that the remedies we are prescribing for our city's health are wrong-headed or impossible or too idealistic. We are simply using our moral imagination to envision what Memphis could be. And we are courageous enough to begin forging the uncertain path that will get us there. I had the privilege of helping the Justice and Safety Alliance with a report that gestures modestly at what it would take to bring about this new vision of Memphis. Allow me to summarize what I think are just two of the many key takeaways from this report. First, we assert against the cultural tide that would insist otherwise, that law enforcement officers do not increase public safety. Look, many of us, self-included, have friends or family members who are members of the Memphis Police Department who work for the county sheriff's office. And I'm not here to question their good intentions or their desire to positively impact their communities. But police officers most often are dealing with the symptoms of community problems, not the root causes. Law enforcement officers arrive on the scene either in the middle of a crime or after a crime has been completed. According to statistics, and this goes in contrast to what TV shows tell you, the average police officer makes 1 felony arrest per year, and in many cities, the clearance for violent crimes is quite low. Increasing the size of a police department does not cure the ills of a neighborhood that are leading to crime. Rather, all we're doing is increasing the number of people on the streets who are at best available to lock citizens up and at worst available to surveil, brutalize, and harm them. President Biden, after winning the presidency on the backs of Black Americans, including specific individuals who galvanized communities, and in the case of Stacey Abrams, galvanized an entire state to vote for him, got Republican applause when at his first State of the Union address 4 weeks ago this evening said the following, and I quote, "We should all agree. The answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police. Fund them, fund them, fund them with resources and training they need to protect our communities," end quote. Unbelievably, after the national and global outrage in response to the police murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many others, and after all of that rhetoric about the value of Black lives, and after all of the promises for a radical re-envisioning of public safety, after all of that, we as a nation have returned once again to our inescapable cultural roots, that the best way to deal with the ills that plague Black, brown, and under-resourced communities is simply with the punitive arm of the state. This, despite the fact, as historian David Whitehouse says, and I quote, "Anti-Black racism was built into the American police work from the very first day," end quote. Whether it was the antecedent of police departments in the South, namely slave patrols that existed to surveil, intimidate, and brutalize enslaved Black bodies, whether it was the creation of police departments in northeastern cities and large cities that were formed simply to quell uprising by immigrant communities who were only protesting unfair working conditions and harsh treatment, whether it was the brutality that the Memphis Police Department inflicted upon Black Memphians in the 1940s under Boss Crump's reign of terror, whether it was the surveillance of Black civil rights groups, teachers, hospital workers, and students in the late 1960s, or whether it was the convenient memory lapse regarding the 1978 consent decree that allowed the Memphis Police Department, in collusion with local corporations, to spy on free speech activities, innocent citizens, and journalists just a few years ago. Friends, the first takeaway from this project can be summed up in the title of the second chapter of this excellent book, The End of Policing by Alex Vitale. The title of that second chapter is, and I quote, "The police are not here to help you." The second takeaway from this project is this: we are less concerned about the absence of police officers and more concerned with the presence of life-sustaining, nurturing, and holistic alternatives. Let me say that again. We are less concerned about the absence of police officers and more concerned with the presence of life-sustaining, nurturing, and holistic alternatives. I hate to admit it, but we may have lost the defund, abolish the police battle at the level of words. And I don't say that lightly. I am squarely in the defund, abolish camp, primarily because the word abolish connects our work to the legacy of those bold abolitionists who bravely endeavored to rid our nation of the scourge of slavery. But the problem is that our detractors and even some of our supporters were fixated on law enforcement agencies, making it seem as if the only thing we wanted to do was punish police departments by cruelly divesting them of their funds. No, that has never been the emphasis. The emphasis has always been to minimize the footprint of law enforcement and punitive institutions, but to maximize the role played by community members and social service organizations in figuring out what our communities need and providing it. It's not simply about abolishing or defunding police budgets, but maximizing our communities. In this regard, we're often told that statistics are against us. We're told that Black residents actually want an increase in the size of the police force. In fact, this was stated by Mayor Strickland after the last mayoral race, when he declared that his victory was a referendum on policing and that the pro-policing side had spoken loud and clear. But there's a nuance to this. Black citizens, including Black citizens in Memphis, often appear to support an increase in expenditures for police departments as a proxy for solving the neighborhood crimes they experience in their communities. See, we've never presented these communities with meaningful alternatives. So in the absence of alternatives, people feel like their only option is more officers. But statistics also clearly indicate that Black citizens, in contrast to their white counterparts, are overwhelmingly critical of the harm brought to Black communities by police. We promote alternatives that do at least three things. First, they must address the root cause of social problems, of crime, of incarceration, with positive empirical results. Second, we are focused on the reduction of social harm, not criminal investigations, not arrests, not prosecutions, not incarceration. We want to reduce social harm in our communities. And third, we are looking to eliminate or at least minimize the reliance on law enforcement agencies in achieving our goals. One example of many will suffice. Memphis, as we all know, has a significant gun problem. In 2021, last year, Memphis averaged almost 1 homicide per day, finishing the year with a record 346 homicides, surpassing the previous high of 333 homicides in the year 2020. This was in addition to the over 5,000 aggravated assaults that were reported throughout the city in 2021. We all know this. We all know someone who's been the victim of a violent crime. We read the reports in newspapers and online. We see the headlines that dominate our nightly newscasts. We sense the anxiety expressed in neighborhood forums like Nextdoor. And yet our gun problem mirrors the nation's gun problem. In the year 2017, the United States had 325 million citizens, but we had 393 million guns. For every 100 citizens, we have 120 guns, or phrased differently, the United States makes up 4% of the world's population, 4%. But in this country, we have almost half of the world's non-military guns. And yet, once again, when asked about this, our district attorney went right back to the old playbook and said that part of the problem is that we need stiffer sentences. That locking people up longer was the solution. Think about that. We're going to take people from communities that are prime with violence, place them in our carceral institutions where they will be subjected to more violence, and then we expect them to reintegrate into society as non-violent citizens. Listen, most victims of crime know their perpetrators. We don't need more police officers. We don't need longer sentences. We need to train our children and our communities and our schools and our churches on how to engage in creative nonviolence. One of my colleagues works for the Center for Peacemaking at Marquette University in Milwaukee. And one of the things the Center for Peacemaking does is they go into public schools and they train students on active nonviolent peacemaking. They teach them how to channel their anger in different ways to stop the violence retaliation cycle. And the revolution they're seeing in these schools is amazing. In fact, the director told me that students will often report to them they didn't know, they weren't aware of other options besides lashing out when they felt offended or harmed. In the project that the Justice and Safety Alliance just put out, we talk about the amazing work done by Cure Violence Global, what used to be called Ceasefire, an organization founded in 1995 by a physician who says violence is stopped in the same way you stop a viral infection. You detect where the infection is happening and you interrupt it. You identify and you treat the highest risk individuals, and you change norms and implement ones that lead to healthy behavior. And in Chicago, in Baltimore, in California, in so many other places, in fact, all over the world, there's been a severe reduction in violence when these principles are fully implemented in previously violent communities. The second takeaway from this project is, as the incomparable Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, and I quote, "Abolition is about presence, not absence. It is about the presence of bold, life-affirming institutions." Let me conclude with this. Friends, we can do this. As I've said before, creating safer and healthier neighborhoods is not the hardest thing this nation has done. I've said lots of times, I have a love-hate relationship with America. But one thing I'll say about this country is this: when we want to do something, when we set our mind to do something, when we want to get it done, we do it. It was hard ending slavery. That was a hard thing to do because some people believed it was their God-given right to own and abuse other human beings, but we ended it. It was hard giving women and Black people the right to vote because some people believed that it was the prerogative of white men of affluence, that they were the best equipped to determine the future of this nation and therefore vote. But we gave women and people of color the right to vote. It was hard putting someone on the moon. I'm still blown away by this, right? We took off from a rotating and moving planet, flew through space, landed on another rotating and moving body, got out of the rocket ship, walked around, got back in the rocket ship, and brought our astronauts home safely. When President Kennedy in 1961 issued the challenge to our nation to get somebody on the moon by the end of the decade, it was a level of audacity that was unimaginable. At that point in 1961, we'd only had someone barely in space for 15 minutes. And yet he said these words, and with this I conclude, quote, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and our skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and one that we intend to win." And 8 years later, we did it. Friends, we can do this. The question is, are we willing to do it? Thank you.
And thank you. Wow. I was just sitting up here, just having a moment. I want to get Dean Frank in if she wants to come and add something to that wonderful presentation. Dean Frank, you're up.
I'm here. So I'll say this. I've always said it's hard following Memphis speakers because they have that good gospel in them that I can't always match up to. And Professor Loynes is not even from Memphis. And I'm gonna have a hard time with that anyway, because that was some good gospel. And one of the reasons why I have really enjoyed working on this project with him, because he's really been able to bring a realness, I'm sure, from his own experience, and then his well-researched vision of what public safety can really look like. And so I think Professor Loynes hit most of what our report tends to convey. So I want to focus in on a few specific things that I think that are embedded and implied in our report. But I only want to just kind of give a little more, a little specific attention to today, because I think that particularly this conversation is relevant in every diverse community in the country. But I think that there are some things in Memphis that are particularly relevant because of the way this community in particular is over-policed, and because of the racial demographics and the racial tension that exists in Memphis. So I want to just hone in on a few things that are really concerning to me and that drove my contribution in wanting to be a part of this project. As Reverend Johnson mentioned, I was a part of the Juvenile Justice Consortium in Shelby County. That's that mouthful of an organization that we've all had a hard time saying at one point or another, but the intent of that organization was to essentially, after Shelby County got into some issues behind this juvenile justice detention center and court processes, the Department of Justice entered Memphis to investigate those effects and to make improvements with the intent that those disparities that were noted in the juvenile justice system would be reduced over time. So I became involved with that project. And I think the thing that was most apparent from that work, when the Department of Justice was urged to leave by Shelby County leaders, including our current sitting judge, Dan Michael, is that the disparities in juvenile justice, there's a story behind them. And it's not just one of our kids, our Black kids in Memphis don't know how to act. It's not just one of our Black kids in Memphis are innately violent. But if you kind of just listen to the narrative here, and I am an outsider, I'm from Houston originally, you get a sense of that is what the problem is. And so I think what I realized quickly, that there is a story and there was a narrative about law enforcement and the plight of our youth that did not really include fully what is missing and all of the pieces of the puzzle that lead up to youth becoming involved in the justice system. We're dealing with things and have always been dealing with things in a very after the fact fashion, after our youth are in trouble, after they've been exposed, after they've been through the detention center, after they've shot someone. And so I think that anyone really looking at these issues can see that the disparities that are connected to our juvenile justice system that the Department of Justice was investigating are very much connected to the disparities that are present in our schools, communities, in our housing, and in our healthcare. And so this report and its recommendations is responsive to that. And I think that what gets left out of the narrative a lot of times when we're talking about over policing and other issues related to the difficulties of law enforcement in communities of color, is we're focusing on those problems of force, which are real problems. And I think that the divest the police conversation finally started putting to the forefront that there's a story behind the crime that we see. There's a story behind our communities never quite feeling safe, but there's a story behind it. And this recommendation of a moral budget is responsive to that story. And when I say a story, I want to give a little bit of a face to this, because in a lot of the work that I've done, it's been very passive in nature, in that I'm serving on this board, and we're trying to do different things in terms of getting more oversight when it comes to our youth. But then there's a very direct role that I've served in, where I listen to the stories of youth who are now being charged with adult crimes, and how they got there. And it is always a result of trauma, early trauma. And one young man saw his brother shot in the face at a young age. And the trajectory of seeing something like that really isn't one that putting more police on the street is responsive to. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is just the disparities in our youth system, and the story that comes well behind those, before those disparities are created. And then the other thing I want to highlight is disparities in victimless crimes. And so whether we're talking about pretextual stops, or the kinds of violations that led up to the George Floyd murder, we are talking about over police communities, and the disparities that come out of over police communities. So just a few things I want to highlight is pretextual stops, and really understanding that one of the reasons that we have the proliferation of pretextual stops that we have is because we have so many police that have time to mess with people based on something that's a traffic violation that could be very minor, no victim, a tail light, a broken window, not fully stopping at a stop sign, whatever you want to call it. Any of those things fit into that category. And this is an entirely unnecessary interaction between that individual being stopped in law enforcement. No one is in danger. It's not a matter of public safety. And so we really need to just look at the very face of what the purpose that police serve. And so pretextual stop is one area that if we did not have as many police on the street, police would have to be used in the ways that police are best suited to serve, which isn't interfering with things like taillights. I mean, they're just not a good use of tax dollars either, by the way. And then the third thing I want to highlight, because I know we're getting kind of pushing on time here, is, and it relates to the first 2 points that I made, and that's just this need to get law enforcement out of the everyday lives of Black people. And there is a such thing as, yes, this is the narrative that I hate being constantly and consistently created, that, well, you don't want police until it's something wrong, or you don't. And yes, there is this admission that when harmful, violent crimes occur, I think we can come up with some more creative ways to deal with some of that. But I also think that there is certainly an over-involvement in things that have not escalated to someone being hurt or harmed. And we have to be honest about that. And there are a lot of things that are built into our system that feed into that problem. For example, how we measure police success is often determined by how many tickets one writes or how many stops one makes versus quality and effectiveness. There's no quality control in police in law enforcement. And so this sense of getting police out of the everyday lives of Black people has everything to do with using police in the ways that they are best suited, which is just good use of resources, which doesn't include these pretextual stops and these other things that law enforcement doesn't necessarily need to be involved with. It involves clear legal standards and practices of when police officers should be involved. And the reality is, because there's a story behind everything, and because the problems start well before the involvement of law enforcement, we're also talking about community-based procedures and resource allocation. And anyone that tells you you can have a conversation about public safety without talking about resource allocation and reallocation just isn't being realistic. And so I think that with those three things in mind, we have to be able to turn to what is also good about a moral budget and one that is based on resource allocation. The ideas behind it offers people help, not jail. What we're talking about is using expensive law enforcement dollars as best used, and I've said that a couple times. And then we're also very likely talking about removing the touches of law enforcement in the lives of people every day, okay, and Black people specifically. And that means we're also talking about de-escalating many situations where law enforcement may not need to be involved. So I'll stop my comments there. I have some other remarks if we have some time to kind of come back to some of those points in discussion, but I want to make sure everyone else has the time to say some things as well.
Well, thank you, Dean Frank, for that. And I'm telling you, you need to get your hands on this report. It is in the chat if you're watching in the webinar format. It is online in several different pages, our YouTube page, our Facebook pages, and we will make sure that everyone has access to this wonderful report. Now I want to bring up Attorney Kimkea Harris and the Reverend Vahisha Hasan to come and just to offer some words of response to what you just heard, and just whatever is on your heart right now. After we've been in the chat, going back and forth, and people have been really excited about what they're hearing. But what say you? Attorney Kimkea, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I really have been moved by some of the statements and some of the research that's been provided here. Dr. Duane, I'm sorry, I appreciated everything that he shared. And of course, Dean Frank, their perspective. What it did remind me of is that in my career in Memphis, when I was a prosecutor in Memphis and Shelby County, I was assigned to be the truancy prosecutor around 99, 2000. I know I'm aging myself a little bit, but one of the reasons I was assigned to do that is that at that time we had a coalition with the DA's office, the police department, and the two school systems at the time, and other service agencies. And juvenile court is one of the biggest issues I know in Memphis and Shelby County, because, basically it's the pipeline. It's where we go and we actually feed people into the criminal justice system. And our job at the time, or what I thought I was positioned with, or given the responsibility of, was to try to figure out that connection between youth and not coming to school, and then youth violence or committing crimes. And so my goal, or what I was tasked with, was to find out what the problem was once a child was identified in the school system as not coming to school, and then get with the family, kind of get under the surface, look under the hood, see what the issue was, and then try to connect them to services in the community. And if all else failed, prosecution was the issue. That's what we did. And I want to say during that time period, I had two very high profile prosecutions. One where I put a mother through the process of where she had to get her GED so that she could model that behavior for her children. And one where I literally had to put a mother in jail. Got a call from the state representative, congressman, because of that. So the reason I bring this up is that I ran into what I believe Duane talked about, the difference between Milwaukee and the town in Michigan. I ran into a stronghold, and you know, Reverend Vahisha can talk to us about what a stronghold is. It's something that's in a community, that's something so deeply rooted that when you run into it, you don't know what it is until you hit it head first. And what I hit was that what I was a figurehead. And when I actually tried to put into play what I thought I was supposed to do, I ran into that stronghold in community that does not want to change and did not want our children to have those resources and did not want those families to do well. And I got kicked out because of that. So it's very important, I think, from what I've heard explained before, is just because it was hard doesn't mean it can't be done. And to change the narrative and change the mindset and the belief of what we can do in Memphis and Shelby County. So I appreciate, you know, the fact that what we're looking at now is we have the community coming together, highlighting these problems, educating the public on things that, to be honest with you, some of us just didn't know. And what we know, once we know better, we do better. And so the coalition that we see now of so many people taking all of their collective efforts and putting it toward looking at a change in Memphis and Shelby County is very important. That's why I'm such a strong advocate that the district attorney's office is the most important office, because from everything flows from there. Police reform and police reimagining, however you want to classify it, is extremely important. But the DA sets that tone, and that DA can set that direction. So I think that that's my response to everything, is that education is very important. And I love all these forums and that we're seeing where we're learning how this process really works and how deep it really goes. And that it goes deep, deep, deep into the soil of this community. But if it has a root, then it means we can pull it up and destroy it.
Wonderful. Reverend Hasan, your comments.
Yes, I have so many things. I've been over here in my amen corner, totally co-signing on everything that has been said this evening. So grateful for all of you. And here are a couple of my musings, if you will. So I wanna start by acknowledging that this is partially a response to the question that came into the chat, right? So who are these rando faces in front of you that are offering all of these things, but are you actually doing that in conjunction with actual people in a way that will impact folks? And are you doing it with people that have been designated as authorities that can implement some of this change, right? So hopefully you hear that the answer is yes for everyone that you just saw. And then I'll say specifically for me, currently being in Nashville, but I lived in Memphis for 3 years, and I am ridiculously excited to be returning to Memphis. I have a countdown app. I'm counting down. I got 8 weeks. It counts all the way down to the seconds. But so I'm gonna break this down just a little bit of some of the coalition type work, both that I am in and also that is possible. And I'm speaking a little bit from a mental health framework because that is one of my disciplines. So I am a reverend, and I am also a mental health clinician. And that's just one of my disciplines if you heard all the bio things, right? So in Nashville specifically, working with the Nashville Community Crisis Response Organization, which is also a collaborative, even with the Black Mental Health Alliance. And these are folks that are seeking a community-led response to mental health care, right? And so what does this look like based on some of the things you heard before? How do we separate this from an incarceral state? How do we separate this from this correlation to police? Mental health and police should not go together. And we have become conditioned in the same way that Duane talked about the other ways that we have been conditioned to accept some things. We have also been conditioned to accept that like policing goes with mental health. And if you think about it, that would be part of the reasons that many people who are struggling through things do not seek care, because of the ways that it can impact other areas of their life, right? So that's some of the work that they're doing. And their core values are abolition in the ways that Duane talked about. I appreciated that so greatly. Community leadership and health and restoration. And then I want to point to Denver just for a second. And we've all kind of made these distinctions between these two different places and what this looks like, right? And so I'm not saying that what is done in Denver is perfect and that it can just be picked up and applied in Memphis, but I'm just pointing to impact that we could learn from, right? And so they have this STAR program, Support Team Assistance Response, and it's a program that dispatches mental health teams instead of the police, not in addition to the police. And I want to make a distinction because there are a lot of co-responder initiatives that are happening across our states that I do not support. Okay, because there's a cross-pollination. They even name it as a cross-pollination of training. So you get mental health clinicians who are being trained in policing, and then police that then get mental health training. And that's a no for this healer right here. That's a no. So, because that goes back to public safety as being life sustaining. And so that's what I want to connect in our conversation is if we're reimagining public safety and then taking that language and that vision, that beautifulness that is available from Duane, what if public safety is deemed as life sustaining? So how do we have a holistic wraparound view of what is possible? And so then if our measure becomes, is this life sustaining? Right? So then, yes, that's how we can respond to violent crime. That is how we can respond to victimless crime, as Demetria talked about. That's how we can respond to lots of things. That's how we can respond to mental health. That's how we can begin and continue to respond to housing, to education, to healthcare coverage. Are these life-sustaining initiatives? So the Denver folks, they routed their calls. So folks did call into 911, 2,500 calls that were routed to this STAR team. They had a certain block of hours that they worked, right? But out of this, 740 of those calls out of the 2,500 went to that the STAR team could actually handle with their different limitations in being a pilot program. And just, you know, for the data people out here in Beyonce's internet, there was 68% of those calls were about houselessness, varying degrees of houselessness. So those calls specifically spoke to how to resource people, not to create a police-based report on them, right? And then 61% of them really did have some level of mental health diagnosable things and that they were able to manage. And I want you to hear that. Out of all of those, no police were involved. No police were brought in. That is an option, but no police were brought in. There was zero arrest. And so, as Duane said, this is not pie in the sky. This is not some just visionary. This is available and possible, and there is a way, right? So then lastly, in Memphis specifically, collaborating with the Justice and Safety Alliance, Memphis Black Healers, definitely with Micah and BLM, those would be the places and spaces that I would move and am already moving as I return to the city that I love. And I just also would hope, and it sounds like we are doing, that we are examining, as we are reimagining policing, as we are reimagining public safety, that we are examining the ways that harm happens. And I feel like Demetria and Kimkea even spoke to some of that, right? How is harm happening, as opposed to just how much money who doesn't have and who doesn't have, right? And so then last, to close, I want to say this as an example. So Cardell started us off saying that I had like gently nudged him into offering a visual of what he was going to present tonight. And that's a place of access, right? And so what happens, like, and that was out of Cardell's and our relationship of having done great work together in the past, and that there was wisdom in the room. Now he comes with all the heavy hitting wisdom and numbers, but he made space. He made space for additional wisdom. And I wonder, while the question is asked to us, are we willing to work with these folks who have been deemed authoritative in these spaces? I also would really want us to examine, are those appointed authoritative spaces and places, are they willing to also welcome the wisdom that is in the room? And that wisdom is in community. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Hasan. And what I want to do now is bring back the panelists. All of the panelists, come on back in. This was wonderful. And we got questions that we're going to get to, but I do want to just give an opportunity for anybody just to say a response to the response. Anybody got anything they want to add to these two wonderful responses? And while they're doing that, people in the webinar, please type in your questions in the question and answer section of the webinar. If you are watching live stream on our YouTube or Facebook channels, please give us a question or two, and we will make sure that the panelists would have an opportunity to address it. So first, any response from the panel?
I just add in, Andre, that I so appreciate and see why it's great to join and partner with so many great people, because we all play a role in this. And I think that one of the strengths of bringing a coalition together is thinking about the different thoughts and abilities and the pieces that people can bring to the table. And this is just the start of what we want to do. And this is by no way saying this is a first effort or anything, but I think that part of what we have not seen is a coming together of, I will say, our side of the viewpoint of what public safety can be in our community, and expressing that even amongst our differences of opinions. And, Duane might believe in abolishing the police, and I might say, no, like, let's divest and invest in other places. And we might have different terminology, but we believe in getting to the same goal. And we believe that there is an end to result, and that we have such great abilities and awareness in our community and nationally. And we have, resources and supports that want to come in and support our community to help us. We have been working on money bail, on the issue of ending money bail, which many great organizations have already been working on. But it's how do we come together and bring the best thinking? And we put together a whole white paper, because it was, well, let's understand what the whole path of money bail is, who all the actors are, and then how do we put together strategy? So we've been having meetings with the judges in the General Sessions Criminal Court divisions, the ones who will meet with us, hopefully more of them. We've met with 2, so hopefully more. We've been talking to judicial commissioners and pre-trial detention and the mayor's office. So all of these different actors in this work, that we have to lay out the platform that we want, come together, and then even as we different act, some people might protest, some of us might go to meetings, some of us might call or write or email or tweet at or send Facebook messages to elected officials, but we can all play a role. And this is just to be, and then having our academics with their great knowledge and data and statistics and ability to translate information into actions. That's just the ability to bring all these things together. And I'm just excited seeing this panel and seeing the work come together and how it's going to move forward in our community.
Wow, and thank you for all that you do as well, too. I do want to, we got about 15 more minutes for our session here. I do want to get to a question that someone had from Facebook. And the question is about neighborhood watch programs. So basically, what do we think about neighborhood watch programs? Is that part of maybe some type of solution Do you think that, the question is exactly, do you think that they are effective in African-American communities? Who wants to take that one?
I guess when you talk about the fact that the question that we're starting off is what makes you feel safe? What is public safety? And, historically, you've been, neighborhood watches have been organized by law enforcement. Law enforcement and the district attorney and the police have come in and said, this is what you do when you see something in your neighborhood. So I guess the question really, even though you're directing to the panel, it really should go back to you. Do you feel like neighborhood associations, watch associations make you safe? My mom is still a native in Memphis and lives in a tight community, and that community is on it. Like nothing happens without someone in the neighborhood calling. When I come in town, they see my car, they don't recognize the car, they call like, who's over at your house? Why is the door open? Is it just a nosy neighbor, or is it something that actually has to be linked into some type of law enforcement agency? But the reason we're here is more so to find out what makes you feel safe. Is that something that you feel like you need that connection? Do you need that connection to your neighbors? I feel like you should, but do you think that you need that connection to the police? And like what's been really outlined earlier is that police are responsive. Police are not proactive. They don't go out and stop crime, they respond. In fact, I work for the police, I work for a police union. And so the police only see you when something bad happens. They see you when you're getting a ticket and you don't want to see them. And you see them when you're the victim of a crime, or let's say you committed a crime. There's just no positive interactions with them. So, when they seek those kind of relationships to have, neighborhood associations or neighborhood watch, is that really working for you? And does it really create that community policing that we're going to hear about a lot, I'm sure, as part of law enforcement's outreach? So the question goes back to you. What do you think?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to piggyback on that, because it goes right into something that the report talks about, and that's community policing. Going back to these community policing standards, and I think the report mentions that and talks about that. Can you kind of just explain what we mean by community policing and why that might not be a good way to look at trying to, quote, reform or to reimagine policing?
Right. And so the problem with community policing is the problem with most law enforcement generated strategies. This is just more policing. And it's just a kind of policing. It is, okay, we police in this way. We talk to the community when we police, and we may have some initiatives that raise awareness about police in the community or police service. So that, I think, is one of the issues, is that it is still just putting more police in communities. And I think that we can kind of bring into this conversation the lack of data on so many fronts when it comes to law enforcement and effectiveness. There's just, we don't try to, the only statistics that we can look at in determining the effectiveness of law enforcement is our crime statistics. But we don't think of crime statistics in that way. Our response has been crime statistics says lots of crime. And so what do? Lots of police. But never do we take that step back to say what's effective. And so one of the problems with community policing, specifically in Memphis, is that there is nothing to demonstrate that what is currently happening here in terms of community policing and what we call community policing, whether it's effective or not. And there's a general disparity in the data as to what's effective or not. And it's more policing.
If I could add to that.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I teach a course. I taught it in the fall of 2019. I'll be teaching it again in the next fall, called How to Get Away with Murder. And I do it, one, because I love Viola Davis and I love the show, but also I want to highlight the fact that the way we've constructed society is such that things that would be illegal, if anyone on this panel did, we allow police officers to do on a regular basis with impunity. And one of the documentaries that we spend time with is called Do Not Resist. And I'll put the link in the chat. And I would encourage everyone, if you think we're being too hard on law enforcement, you need to look at that, and you need to look at how police officers are trained. And they spend some time with a gentleman who is the #1 trainer of law enforcement officers. He speaks 200 times a year. And in fact, the person who murdered Philando Castile was trained by this individual. And they are trained to be intentionally violent. And you have to hear it. They're not hiding this, people. They say specifically, you have to be violent before someone hurts you, right? And they call people docile sheep and all this type of stuff. And so that's why we're being hard. Another person I'd recommend you look up the story of Tony Timpa, Timpa. He was a white male who had mental health problems. And that's why I really appreciate what Reverend Hasan was saying. And you have to look at the dehumanizing way law enforcement officers responded to this person, and they end up killing him because they had him in that compressed hole where they had the knee on the back of his back while he's down, couldn't breathe, and he ends up dying right there. And they're mocking him when he called the police on himself because he was having a mental health crisis. So we're dealing with an institution in America that is only trained to be violent. Right? They're not trained to help you. They're not trained to help you with mental health. They're trained to be violent. So that's why we're saying anything that's connected to law enforcement, we can love officers or not, is not going to help us deal with the problems that we're facing.
Wow. Got another question from Facebook. The viewer asked, outside of abolition, what other areas do the panelists see as an opportunity to pull law enforcement from and offer as an alternative? An example, there was a discussion today about removing police from traffic enforcement. So I guess the question, outside abolition, what other areas do the panelists see as opportunities?
I mean, if you go back a few years and you look at City of Memphis' own 5-year strategic plan from several years ago, strategic and financial plan, one of the recommendations was that they move away from commissioned officers to people who can go out, who are not necessarily commissioned, don't carry a gun, who can go out to traffic stops and things like that, to broaden out the group of people who can respond to incidents that occur in the community rather than people who carry a gun or police officers. In addition, in the report, you can see several instances, and Duane, Demetria can talk about this, of interventionists. I think that one of the things, this is a similar conversation about the neighborhood watch, that part of the question on community policing, or we've been pushing against police in schools, just because police or law enforcement can do something doesn't mean that they should. So at the point that we are talking about police officers mentoring in the community or being father figures or, taking young people on trips or building, even relationships with the community, is that something that they're best positioned to do? So I think that as we broaden out the idea of what is needed in our community and the types of interventions that can be supportive, and even the needs, I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that as we talk about public safety, we usually lump in police and fire in that. And if we look at the fire department, it's basically an emergency medical service. And so if we broadened out the idea that fire doesn't mean that they're responding to fire, they respond to many more health incidents than they do fire. So they are a health program. So if we split it out into there's policing, there's fire, there's intervention, there's health, we'd already have a broader idea of what public safety is. And this would get and even as we think about they talk about the challenge it is in hiring police officers, this would help with that if we expanded the idea of what's needed in our community and what can provide support.
And the last question, we got time just for one more question. Fully developed and organized communities have less crime and policing, parentheses, suburban. How do we get more resources for community development into urban distressed communities? I know that's what we're after, so I guess the question is, how can that happen? And I think that's where some nicely placed arguments will have to take place. But anybody want to take that one?
Can I just jump in for Vahisha? I believe that the first thing you do is not have a large minority community population in your urban area. Because there are a lot of urban cities across this whole country, but you only hear about Detroit, Chicago, Memphis, those cities that have a higher concentration of Black people. So again, it goes back to the over-policing. One of the examples I gave somebody, I'm gonna be honest with you, someone very high up in the police union, when I sit and talk to him about the Black perspective and how to bridge that gap. And I said, it's as if you had two children. You have one child that you monitor constantly. You are there when they don't put the cap back on the toothbrush. They didn't put the milk back in the refrigerator. They didn't make their bed. They didn't do their homework. You catch every violation. Then you have that one child that you barely show up, and you might catch the fact that they missed the homework assignment, or you might miss the fact that they didn't let the cat out that night or whatever. That is the difference between how you police the Black community and how you police non-Black communities. If you're there, you're gonna see something. You're gonna find something because you're there and you're gonna catch every violation. If you took that same intensity and put that in the suburban communities that are not primarily populated by the Black population, guess what you're gonna find? The same thing, because it's the human element, not a racial aspect, a racial thing. So you're not going to get that until you recognize that that's what they're doing, is they're over-policing us. And because of that, we disproportionately land in a criminal justice system. Vahisha.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to that resourcing piece, and I'm not holding that piece of the work in Memphis, but I am willing to come alongside with that moral budget. Right. That's going to be, that's part of the answer to that. And I think I'm back to my social science hat. We really got to look at our conditioning. What are we conditioned to believe? What are we conditioned to accept? What constructs are we conditioned to align ourselves with? Right. And so to a part of what Kimkea was saying, if you took some police dogs, some drug sniffing dogs, and went to NASDAQ, wherever they ring the bell, and went through there, like the dog would just fall over. Like it wouldn't even be able to handle life, right? Because it's very clear and known. I mean, it's clear and known that cocaine and a lot of drug use is in that space. But those dogs are in our neighborhood. That over-policing is happening in Black and brown and less resourced, poor space, right? So again, back to the conditioning of what is crime. Let's just begin to question everything. What is crime in the way that it harms? So let's deal with harm and not so much what we have been conditioned to what is crime. And then looking at a participatory budget making process, right? So how can more folks be involved in a budget process, both in a way that speaks to our values and both in a way that speaks to our needs? And I think that's where we are, and that's where we have been. And I am down to collaborate in all of the ways. And then I want to co-sign on what Cardell was saying. Even the STAR program that I was talking about in Denver, it is made up of a coalition of folks that do include the police. So I also want to get, I really want to break down this who's at war about the things, right? This is not actually about war. This is about peace that is life sustaining. And how can we get closer to being life sustaining? Duane, you done took me in. I want to read everything you wrote. I'm coming to your classes. I'm auditing everything because you had me at life sustaining. My first name means life, and that's what I am about up in here. Do you hear me? I am here for it. So is our budget speaking life? Is our view of crime speaking life? Is our the way we move in community, is that life-giving, life-sustaining? That's the measure. Let's recondition ourselves while we're doing all of this reimagining.
And if I could add one quick footnote to everything that was just said, I know the hour's late. We fund what we value. right? If we really value something, we'll find the funding for it. I work in the health equity space, and I was talking to a colleague whose organization was able to do amazing things getting people vaccinated. And I said, how are you able to do that? And they said, because when it came to COVID, the government gave everyone a blank check. We were sending checks to people. We were funding technological advances that had never been done before. We were doing all of these things because we realized there was a problem, and doggone it, we'll find the money to make it happen. The problem is we don't see this as a problem. So we have to be careful when we talk about budgeting. Budgeting is a huge part of it, but let's not be fooled. If we really wanted to do this, we would find the money. And not only that, what people don't realize is if we did public safety correctly, it would save money and it would save people's lives and would make us healthier and better and a stronger nation. So I just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Wow. Look at the time. We're flying. We are having fun. Some great discussions, but we're going to have to stop it here. I do want to give you an opportunity, panelists, before I say my closing remarks. Are there anything, any announcements, anything that's coming up that the community needs to be aware of? Please share that now. And if you got links, you can put them into the chat so folk can follow up. This is going to be replayed over and over again. So you'll get an opportunity for all the folk who missed it and all the folk you say, you should have been there for all of it. It will be replayed again, and all of the announcements will be replayed as well too. So anybody? Announcements.
Yes, I would like to announce, sorry. We have upcoming next week, what day? I'm going to get my date wrong. On the 5th or 6th, I'm putting the registration link in the chat. Thank you. There's Joanne with me right on time. April 5th, we have a community read. Charged is a great book by Emily Bazelon. And so over the last several weeks, we've been asking the community to read Charged, listen to Charged. That's what I did. And then the culminating event will be next Tuesday, where we will actually have Emily Bazelon on with us to have a community conversation about the book. So it's a great book. It showcases in not so positive ways Shelby County as it looks at prosecutors and district attorneys and their impact across the country. So a great opportunity there. And just would also just invite everyone to look at the Moral Budget Coalition for Memphis to Shelby County, which we put in the links, where we will have community participation in the budget process this year, at least with Shelby County, who we got response from. Still waiting on the call back from City of Memphis. And then also the Justice and Safety Alliance, we invite you to go to the website and connect with us so that we can keep you informed. And if there's anything particular that you're interested in touching on, we also have an effort coming up called Justice 22 to engage and inform around the real impact of the upcoming justice elections in August that have such a great impact. We only get 8 years, once every 8 years. So once a decade, we get to select who our DA is, who our judges are, and we get to select them. And we usually are not as engaged as we should be, especially in the judges' races. Especially juvenile court judge and DA, which are hugely important, especially as we send more children to adult court than anywhere in the state of Tennessee combined. So clearly some issues that we need to face, and everybody needs to be educated and informed so they can make informed decisions as they go to the precincts and the polls to vote. Thank you.
Great. And I'm so glad that other folk in the chat are sharing links and information. Anything else? Any other announcements? Anything coming up? All right.
Oh, for people listening, do want to raise up in the comments on the Zoom for folks, the Memphis People's Convention 2022 coming up April 23rd. So the link is in the chat. So please, we encourage everyone to support the Memphis People's Convention and sign up and attend that effort as well.
Great. Like I said, this has been a wonderful panel. This is the first of several town halls that we are planning to have. And I am so grateful and thankful that all of you decided to join us on this evening. I want to thank the Reverend Vahisha Hasan. I want to thank Cardell Orrin, Attorney Kimkea Harris, Dr. Duane Loynes, Dean Demetria Frank, all of you who are in the webinar and on Facebook and on YouTube and social media. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for this Reimagining Public Safety initiative. This is not the only time you will hear about this. Believe me when we say this, we are working, the coalitions are coming together. You can find a place and a space within many of these coalitions. So you need to sign up and join right now with any one of these wonderful organizations that's doing this work. Can we reimagine what public safety looks like? I think we started tonight, and we are going to continue until the vision become a blessed reality. I am the Reverend Dr. Andre Johnson, Senior Pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries, Executive Director for the G-Life Social Justice and Public Advocacy Institute. Shout out to my good friend, Elena Bloodworth of the Black Public Defenders Association, and thank you for all who have made this night happen. May God bless you and may God keep you. Thank you again.